Hello everyone and welcome back to True Words Aren't Beautiful. And today we are continuing from the last video on processes, aspirations, and goals. So before I start, if you hear thunder and you hear the rain, that is because we have a signal 1 out of 5 signals for typhoons right now. But this is important enough of a video to record this. I don't have a studio to block out the sound, but I also want you to know that knowledge and wisdom and information are available to you whether you are someone who is living in the projects, you are crashing on someone's couch, or you are living in wealth and luxury. Information, knowledge, and wisdom are there for everyone to make what they will out of it under any circumstances. And it is that awareness that allows us to make these choices. So the first thing I'd like to start with is a very well-known Zen parable, or rather Zen maxim, which goes like this. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. This is the same message and spirit of the other Zen maxim, which is, when you reach the top of the mountain, keep climbing. So let's break this down a bit. What does it mean to chop wood and carry water? Traditionally, those were the things that the monks and the hermits would do as part of their daily activities. They would chop wood for the fire to keep warm and to cook, and they would go collect water from the well or the river to bathe and to drink and also to cook. So how is there the potential to achieve or realize enlightenment from those simple daily activities? Well, part of what they're talking about is even in the mundane life, there is enlightenment. And that enlightenment can also be translated or worded as awareness. Not just awakening, not this sudden realization, but this vigilance, this knowing. Not something magical or powerful, but something natural. So let's say that you're a guy who has been taken in as a student to some monks or a master. And what you're told to do is not to study anything, not to read any texts, chant any mantras, or do any other exercises just yet. All you do is sit and observe and follow exactly what they do. And that includes getting up, sitting quietly with no explanation, and then doing your chores, such as cleaning up, chopping wood, carrying water. And then you start breaking down some of those practices that are not described in full there, such as how you sleep, how you wake up, how you clean up the area around you, and how you bathe yourself before you sit and meditate. And then you start noticing as well, they're not just sitting quietly and doing nothing. They are doing nothing, capital N. You pay attention to their breathing, you pay attention to their posture, and you start noticing, oh, okay, there's more to this than I thought. And eventually, from observation and from guided instruction for anything that you're not seeing, you are refining your process with intention, and eventually that intention disappears and becomes natural and empty. So, when you do something on one level, you don't know what you're doing. You're not conscious. You're just doing something mechanically. But at the highest level, you're doing something naturally and effortlessly. And what goes on here, what we're really trying to get at here is the process of understanding and realization. So this might sound like it's completely nebulous and hard to grasp. But let's focus on another kind of process here, another kind of goal and aspiration, and that is the process of growing up. So my generation, the micro-generation of Zennials, which some people might call young Gen X or older millennials or elder millennials, a lot of us didn't feel like we've grown up. And a lot of us argue that this model for what being a grown up has changed. In particular, when you look at middle age and midlife crisis, well, midlife crisis, I really don't understand how to explain midlife crisis anymore because boomers judge Gen X and millennials on how we should be, on what we should achieve in our lives by middle age. My stepfather in particular is notorious for saying how he was in college, he was juggling 2 jobs at Macy's and Emporium and raising 2 kids and going to college, and he bought his own house before he was 25. This was the 1950s and early 1960s. So it is a very different world than 2024 is. And the projection of this framework and this experience and these lenses, these vague criticisms and this belligerence from the older generations, from our parents, some of our older peers and our bosses, are what make us feel like shit. We don't have guidance from them. We have criticism and belligerence masking itself as guidance. Guidance telling us who we are supposed to be by a certain age, who we are supposed to be as adults. But this guidance, if you want to call it that, does not adapt to our individual strengths and weaknesses. And it almost always discounts our traumas, experiences, values, aspirations, and some of our own neuroses. Because of this lack of sensitivity, this lack of awareness, and a very common tendency to bottle up emotions, whether it's through the British stiff upper lip, the American no pain, no gain, and the Filipino just smile and bahala na, just deal with it, or the Chinese save face approach. These are the things that focus purely on the actions and the material conditions, as opposed to the internal world, which is why many of us are hemorrhaging. And when we're hemorrhaging, instead of adequately dealing with these emotions, dealing with these struggles, we bury them or we self-medicate through booze, through retail therapy, buying things to feel good about ourselves briefly until we want more, or bucket lists and doing things like going on vacation to hide from ourselves. And sadly, this includes even some forms of therapy where we say, oh, I go to a therapist, I should feel good about myself now, why do I feel miserable? Without realizing some therapists work better for us with our relationships and our relationships with them as well as our relationships with ourselves compared to others. You might do better with one therapist over another. And some therapists are just so caught up in their own secondary traumas that they're not very good for us. They might actually be better off working on themselves at a certain point. So, going back to this, we're running in circles and we're growing stagnant because we're not improving at each level, which is what a goal should be, a step along the way rather than the finish line. And what is growing up but a process? What is growing up besides being a vague process that means different things to different people? What is being a grown-up when we're still struggling to find out what is adulting, as they say now? What is being a grown-up? Can we define that as my stepfather does, which is you have no debts, you have savings, you own a car, you own a house, you're married, and you have dental and medical insurance? Well, his definition of being a grown-up and an adult is all of that. His definition of being a grown-up means once you have all that, you're allowed to be happy. But until then, you're not allowed to be happy, you're not truly happy because your life is incomplete. And yet, one of my teachers likes to say, do you ever see politicians or CEOs really happy? They're smiling, but you don't feel joy there. You feel something empty or you feel something insincere and disingenuous. These are people who know how to look good, but why are they constantly showing off how much power they have, how much wealth they have? And then you look at some of the yogis the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Sufis, and even some of the Christian mystics. And you look at them, they're very happy with simple things. I see a Jewish family which is happy just having work and taking care of their kids. I see a Christian family that goes to church, very modest, donate to charity, help out their neighbors. I see Buddhists, not necessarily monks, but Buddhist practitioners who are happy with very simple foods, very minimal possessions. They don't really watch the news, and if they do, they're very disconnected from it and have no particular love for politics or social unrest. They're contented with what they have materially because emotionally, internally, and mentally, they're balanced. So if we look at growing up, a lot of what the critics talk about, a lot of these older generations, only look at material circumstances. They don't care about the process to how we achieve those material circumstances. It's the anything goes process, meaning that process can be different for everyone because the goal is to be materially stable. But this does not mean you're allowed to be mentally or emotionally stable. In their mind, you're delusional. In their mind, you're a hippie, a dirty hippie, and you're probably part of a cult. You're delusional, and therefore you can't possibly be happy. You're not allowed to be happy because your material circumstances don't reflect that. But then there's some people who just don't care. So if we look at that process, I don't want to call that enlightenment. I don't want to call that awareness or being grown up. But whatever it is, if I look at myself right now, my daily process, which I'll get to later in this video, is how I can say, okay, I must be a grown-up. I must have some extent of awareness. I don't want to say enlightenment because that's a loaded term, because I take responsibility for my actions now. I found a way to have peace and joy in my life. I found a way to process my difficult emotions and my struggles and my sadness. I acknowledge the love and the longing I have for people like my ex-girlfriend or people who I care for who are suffering and whom I've lost. I care for my friends who can't get out of their heads and they're depressed. I care for them, whether they're the ones who are struggling financially or the ones who are financially stable but are miserable because even when they have everything materially provided for them, they're miserable. So I understand there's a leak in their process. There is a hole in their foundation. So let me divert briefly to talk about Milarepa, a very famous sage in Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism. He murdered his father, who was also an arhat, a kind of Buddhist saint. And those are two of the biggest sins in Buddhism. But somehow, he became one of the most revered sages in Buddhism. How is it that someone can commit two of the biggest crimes and yet somehow be a model for enlightenment? Well, let's go back to the second video on this channel where I talked briefly about him, and my understanding was not as strong as it was now. Because the focus there was on second chances and forgiveness and sincerity. Milarepa did everything he could when he realized where his mind had taken him, where his anger and his violence took him. It took him to places that didn't bring him joy or freedom. That process of having to murder his father, that process of violence. Eventually, when you realize one process doesn't work, you say, let's try something new. And so he embraced the dharmic lessons of the Buddha, the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And when he found that process worked for him, he became enlightened. And from his example, you can be the worst person And with the principles of yin and yang, at the peak of yin becomes yang, just like at the peak of yang becomes yin. The worst person can be the most outstanding person, just like the most outstanding person can be corrupted easily. And in my process, I went from being sad and miserable and struggling to finding a kind of balance. And I'm not going to lie and say that I have it all figured out. I'm going to say I found something that works so far, that allows me to appreciate and find joy with everything that I have, even when I struggle with some people I'm not particularly fond of all the time. And yet, with my practice, I'm able to accept them as they are and say, they're doing their own process. If it works for them, cool. Their karma, their business, their responsibility, not mine, as long as they're not affecting me. But then, they don't consciously need to affect me. I choose whether to accept if they will affect me or not. Even if I get banned from a cafe because someone thinks I give off major serial killer vibes. Does it affect me at this point? Maybe months ago it did. Does it affect me now? No, because it shows me they needed to do that to feel good about themselves. And I feel good about myself whether or not I'm allowed there. I have other cafes I can go to. I have other friends. And if I were allowed to be back there, I probably still wouldn't be going there because I don't have any reason to be there. I don't find joy there. I'm sure I could find joy regardless of how some people might perceive me. But right now, it's not something I need to think about. So, processes, redemption, second chances. Another person who I've been following recently is Sadhguru, a well-known Indian mystic. I'll put a link to a couple of his videos in the description of this one later. One of the things he talked about recently was about how humans, compared to animals, have to consciously make the choice to evolve. Animals evolve naturally, and their evolution is mostly physiological. But as humans, if we wish to evolve, we have to make conscious, directed, intentional effort in order to evolve. Whether it's through health and fitness, education and learning, and wisdom, or spirituality. We have to put in the right effort, otherwise we stagnate. The fitness buff suddenly ends up miserable and demotivated and becomes a slob. The Harvard graduate stops reading and basks in her own brilliance. Then other people confuse physical sensations and insights for achieving enlightenment. Like a girl I know who thinks she's a student of Dharma because she read one book called If the Buddha Dated. Or my dad who claimed to be enlightened because he had a certificate from a temple in Japan for donating to the temple. Or my mom who considers herself a yogi because she uses her yoga exercise tapes and DVDs for her fitness daily. When I think about it, my parents are hilarious because they snipe at each other for being more spiritual than the other. And they compare their own spiritual understanding and achievement to talk about how great they are. And when I think about them and I realize the age I am right now is the age they were when they had me, I don't see them as these adults. I see them as kids, children, emotional children who've had a few life experiences and material gain and wealth. But they still act like children. They're still comparing themselves to other people, talking about how much money they have, talking about how enlightened they are, how healthy they are, how many sexual partners they've had. And when you have this comparison to other people's processes to make yourself feel better, I don't consider that being an adult. I consider that still being a child. Yes, it would be nice to have the right source of income and the expression of your skills to reflect your value through your income, to provide for yourself, to have a home, and to enjoy your wealth, whether it's big things or little things. It's nice to be able to be self-sufficient, but that self-sufficiency is not just material. It's also emotional and mental. When you're allowed to mind your own business and not care about how someone parents their children, how someone spends their money, how someone processes their unhealthy emotions, how another person eats, whether they're vegan or paleo or keto, what another person's fitness regimen is, what another person's religion is. That to me is a form of maturity which defines you as an adult. And I don't believe I'm totally there yet, but I really don't mind if someone is a Bible thumper. I don't mind if someone is constantly talking about Islam. I don't care if someone says, I went to a Vipassana retreat and I'm enlightened, I'm Buddhist, I'm a yogi, blah, 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 blah. Cool, dude. Cool story, dude. Tell it again. Tell it to someone who cares. I care. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you're living your life based off the best that you can understand and the best that you know. Not all of us are willing to be open. Not all of us are willing to consider other frameworks, other ideas, other processes. If you found one that works for you, cool. Your process might make me miserable and make you happy. Or you might have a process that works for you so far, but you don't see how it might be damaging you. And that's not my business unless you're my student who's paying me to make it my business. So let's refer back to goals, aspirations, and processes. So, if when dealing with grief and dealing with sadness and depression, if the goal is not to feel sad anymore, it is when goals are not the best framework to look at our activity. Because from moment to moment, we can feel happy, even in grief, if we go to an amusement park to ride a roller coaster. If we're traveling, going to Cinque Terre in Italy, buying things we like in my case, buying books, video games, and board games, or a new guitar, or just being with our friends. Sometimes you want to be with your girlfriends and have a few drinks and talk about how guys suck. Sometimes you want to be with your bros and say you don't need women because you're happy with your friends. But when all that's over, suddenly we return to our state of our loss and our disconnect. We have our distractions no different from someone, a drunk, for example, who goes to a tavern. A drunk who goes to a tavern and then leaves and is miserable again is no different from someone who goes to a Vipassana retreat, talks about how brilliant they are for being better than others. Instead of going to a tavern, they get drunk off the idea of being a yogi. Just like the person who says, look at me, I do CrossFit. Look at me, I have 100 items all checked off on my bucket list. Look at me, I bought a house. Look at me, I have a hot girlfriend or hot boyfriend. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Hey, no one needs to look at you. What they need to do is look at themselves, and you need to look at yourself. Which is why, in my current state of withdrawal, I'm constantly looking at myself and saying, oh shit, I need to improve here, I need to improve there. Whatever other people are doing, that's their business. My only business is to be a better version of Johnny C. So this is where definitions are important. And that's where the daily goal of doing things that are helpful, which is the theme of this channel, just do shit. That's why it's important to just do shit. Daily little goals. Then you remind yourself of your aspirations. And then you monitor your process and your progress regularly to see how well your framework is doing for you. To see if your process is good. To see how much progress you've made. So, if we look at my pilgrimage and my withdrawal, both are part of the same process that worked for me with my daily practice. Every morning, I clean up. I sweep the floors. I take a shower. I read good things like Buddhist sutras, the Tao Te Ching or Zhuangzi, books on Zen, the Puranas. I meditate. I do my exercises, whether it's a little bit of HIIT daily, resistance training, or my Taoist martial arts stuff, my martial yoga, like the Ba Duan Jin or Jan Zhuang. Then I create art, whether it's visual art, writing songs on my guitar, or writing fiction, or these vlogs. Then, from that contentment of the self-work, I show others I care, because by being okay with myself, I care about how others feel, if they're okay, particularly my friends, because they allow me to show them I care. They allow me to enter their lives and tell them, hey, I care about you. Even if I'm not always saying I care, just because I'm not sending you the message saying, hey, how are you doing? I might just be doing things like sending memes or pictures of my travels or things I've drawn or links to good readings. Penguins do something called pebbling. Pebbling is a means of showing affection. So just because someone is not engaged in heart-to-hearts all the time doesn't mean they don't care. This is an insecurity some people have where they think you're not putting 100% effort into me. No, no, no. It's your lack and your demand and your grasping that want you to control someone and express themselves and their love for you in a way that fits into your framework as opposed to their framework. I can show a lot of love for someone, like a woman in Scotland, by pebbling. It may not feel enough for her, and she'll think that I only care about myself. I can pebble my friends, whom I don't talk to for months at a time and might have a phone call once or twice a year or even every other year. And yet, we are okay with ourselves and we're okay with each other, to talk to each other, seldomly. But this doesn't mean we're not a part of each other's lives. It means that we allow each other to grow, and yet our presence and our connection, like my friends in DC or Pomona or Colorado or London, Sydney, Seoul, Bangkok, Toronto, everywhere. These people mean a lot to me. Whether or not I mention them, whether or not I message them every day or not, by being okay with myself, I'm able to express myself in a much better way, and expressing that Buddha nature naturally, effortlessly. Opportunities come, joy is spread, and life improves, even if we have a world full of both suffering and joy, with wars and plagues and jerks. They all have their place in this illusory world we call samsara, or the matrix. This is all a dream. My process reminds me of this. My process allows me to remember, okay, I can't change other people. I can't change the circumstances around me. I can't dictate how other people should live their lives. I can share my experience and they can choose to follow me or not and make it their own. But their karma, their lives, their responsibility, their business, not my own. By working on my process, I get better. You can see how low I was in my life last November during a suicide attempt, and you can see how I'm doing better now, even with some struggles. In this process, 3 books have started to write themselves. In this process, I've created a lot of art. In this process, I've made good friends. I've uptraded some friends who no longer serve me well. And I'm at a point where I will be doing annual pilgrimages. I can invite people to join me through our own journey and growth, and some may elect to follow me and practice and learn with me as students. So I'm able to monetize myself. I am able to create value through what I do and who I am. If your process works, you will not only find liberation and joy in that process, but you will also realize your own value. And you can monetize that value if that's important to you. But most importantly, your process should lead to a very important aspiration. That is to remind yourself daily, you matter. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.